Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have affordable ACT, CLT, and SAT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built in study planner, and full length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, be sure to use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we've got Hyuk Chang with us. And Hyuk, I'd love if you can introduce yourself and where you work.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I'm an admissions officer for the Academy of Interactive Entertainment. We're a hands-on 3D animation game development college. We focus on simulating a studio-based environment for people who learn better hands-on rather than in a traditional classroom setting.
Yeah, fantastic. I actually worked in the game industry for a decade,
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
yeah, we'll have to catch up about that another time.
Definitely.
But we are here now in the education capacity, right? And I'm curious, as a admissions officer yourself, we're really excited to have your opinion on a topic that gets talked about a lot on this podcast, but
Mhm.
it's always from consultants and people that are just kind of, you know, guessing from the other side of the table.
Sure.
What do college admissions officers look for in an application? And I think, if you want to specify it towards like art and things that you're doing, that's great.
Yeah.
Or just generally. But I guess where do you want to start? Like maybe if you just want to walk us through what the process looks like on your side, right? Like
Sure.
when you get an application, I'm sure you're getting hundreds or thousands of them, but when you get one, kind of what is the first step that you're going to take and what is the process does that application go through?
Yeah, so AIE isn't like the first school that I've worked at. So there's a few different application processes. I know that it always feels like a bit of a cop-out response to go, well, it depends. But having listened to a couple episodes of Shift, I'm like,
Mhm.
you get that a bit. So when it comes to the application process, at least in regards to my role over the years, it's definitely started first and foremost with the student's ability to talk about themselves because more than anything, applications, while they're seen as a form that people fill out from top to bottom, it's more an opportunity for the admissions staff, for the school, depending on whether the instructors or other admin are involved in the admissions and application process. It it's the first point of contact for that student to advocate for themselves. So, what we're looking for, besides, proper capitalization and punctuation and formatting, is just the consideration for the person on the other side of the table. So,
Mhm.
more than anything over the years, people who are considering, oh, hey, I did some research about the school and these are my applicable skills. These are the classes that I have taken and are able to apply that over what it is that we offer at the school. That is what we're looking for primarily. So, not only the skill set that you're bringing, but how you are able to talk about yourself.
And so, yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit. The first thing is that is this to say that you have sort of specific characteristics or qualities in mind? And again, maybe that depends on because, if you're working at an art institution, it's obviously you're
Yeah.
probably not looking for somebody who took a bunch of economics classes, right? But I'm curious, kind of, is it that you have something in mind as like here's my ideal applicant or here's different shades of my ideal
hmm
applicant when you're going in, and is that something you guys agree upon and talk about, or is it more something that you just are doing passively or subconsciously even?
No, that's a great question. I, at least in terms of my experience, there are shades of the perfect applicant, quote unquote. So when it comes to a particular applicant, we want to see, again, that ability to talk about oneself. Preferably, they have some kind of experience, whether in the classroom environment or extracurricularly, that relates to the field of study that they're wanting to focus on. So when it comes to, say, game design, a lot of skill centers, high schools these days have game development courses in some shape or form, or the number of game jams and other things of that nature that are out there. That student's ability to not only talk about that, but also just mention the fact that that is something that they have sought out on their own, um, to us signals a strong candidate. Besides that, a student who tends to do a lot of their own learning, right? Because as much as the classroom is going to assist, we also want to see people who want to learn.
So how do you, I mean, certainly I can see, you're being proactive about pursuing opportunities that are relevant to the career. That makes a lot of sense, right? Like
Hmm.
game jams, or if you want to be a biologist, did a summer abroad working on like a marine biology expedition or something, right?
Sure.
I don't know. That was a bad example, maybe, because I didn't know a good way to put it. But you get the idea. That all makes sense. But you mentioned, willingness to learn. How do you demonstrate that?
Yeah. So, especially when it comes to something that is relatively gate kept in the form of game development, 3D animation, because you require technology. You require certain thresholds need to be passed in order to even have access to the skill set and access to the software that will allow you to begin learning that skill set. So, not everybody has that opportunity, and we try to be conscious to that. So, for people who
Mhm.
are more interested in the art side of things, comes to traditional art, and that expands beyond just paper and pencil drawing, and I'm sure we'll end up talking about portfolios at some point. But when it comes to that student, it's not just how zeroed in are you on this specific thing, so much as how many different avenues have you explored in order to try to have access to that thing. So, in that same way that I would suppose that other admissions teams for more traditional schools would look at, say, how many extracurriculars were you involved in? How involved were you? What positions did you hold while you were a part of those extracurriculars? We just want to see how many other ways have you explored. Does that necessarily translate one to one for clubs or classes? Not necessarily, but as long as you are able to talk about those varying pathways that you've taken to try to get there, again, it just boils down to that ability to talk about oneself.
Yeah. Well, and so how should you be showing that you're doing these things, right? I mean, it's obviously going to show up on your resume, I hope, right? But is it that you're literally putting like participated in a game jam on your resume, right? Like, because I think there's a lot of people that would think that unless you're president of the game jam club
Yeah,
or whatever,
yeah.
that like it's not worth being on the resume.
I think in the case of students, a lot of times students don't necessarily have, especially if they're coming out of secondary education, they may not have had every opportunity to have those accolades. So for students who weren't the president of the club, who weren't, say, the development lead for XYZ project, it's still worthwhile to put your experience because the admissions team, again, going back to consideration for the person on the other side of the table, we don't know what kinds of skills that you have. So, whether that role was the most impactful person of said team, we still want to know that that is something that you have done.
Yeah, and I guess then where does it fit in also with like the essays and other
Hmm.
things like that, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I think that there's again, it's like your essay is supposed to be this like, this is the story of my life, not
hmm.
like, hey, I participated in this game jam on this day and this game jam on this day, and it was in this project where
Sure,
I was,
sure.
a level designer, right? So I wasn't like the most important person. And then I did these like how do you kind of that into the story, or kind of what advice do you have for people to kind of bring
Yeah.
that in?
I find that students are often, because of that comparison, people want to compare themselves naturally to the people who are most successful. They want to compare themselves to that most important person, air quotes, in that project. So when they're considering that, they're not thinking about their own accomplishments within their own sphere. So when it comes to that ability to talk about it, students don't necessarily have to go, oh, I was a part of this project, but talk a bit more in depth. How did you handle that interpersonal relationship of working on a team? How did you operate? Like, what things were happening in your life around that time? What challenges were you facing? And these are a large part of that story. We want to know all of the different ways that you surmount challenges rather than what were you challenged with, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Right. Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like a lot of what you're looking for is not necessarily that they had a ton of accomplishments, but that they, had goals and worked towards them. And, even if it wasn't necessarily a straight line, would you say that's an accurate statement?
Definitely. When it comes to the applications that we receive, one of the minor writing portions that we have on, say, the AIE application is to talk about prior learning experiences. And we've
Mhm.
seen a wide range of answers to that, as you would with any open-ended question. Um, but in terms of the ones that cross my desk and immediately draw my attention, are the ones that are able to talk about multiple circumstances, not I did this one thing, or I went to a skill center, or I did a game development course. Those are less interesting to just glancing over at it than, hey, I tried all of these different things, and that has informed my decision to apply to, put my hat into the ring for this school.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what I'm hearing, it sounds a lot like you're pre-screening kind of for people that are really interested in game development specifically, right? And that makes sense, right, given the focus of your program. For more general admissions where it's, I'm applying to this school because I want to go to the school and I'm going to take a business administration major because I want to do business, right? It's like a little more vague. I
Yeah,
mean, frankly, that was what I was like when I was that
yeah.
age. I'm curious, kind of, how would your advice change for those people,
Hmm.
right? Because I feel like your advice is very valid if you've got something really specific, right? You're like, I really
Absolutely.
want to do theoretical physics. You do all these theoretical
Yeah.
physics things to kind of demonstrate interest in the topic, and that's very valuable. But what if you're not so sure, or
Hmm.
you don't have that kind of focus yet?
Yeah, I guess just drawing from my own personal experience, my own college journey, and then also tying that in as an admissions officer now. I was not the most successful of students in the traditional classroom. So with that, I had a lot of college counselors going, man, what are you doing? Let's try to get your resume. Let's try to get all of these things to make an attempt at having schools actually take a second look at you. And speaking with college counselors at that time, I would get calls from admissions offices going like, "What's going on here?" So I think one of the, I guess, hallmarks of the success that I experienced, and the hallmark, if we're just looking across everything that we've talked about here, is to be as interesting as possible, regardless of what shade that takes. Um, so for the hyper specific game development sort of applications and applicants that we receive, we're looking at, oh, hey, you not only were a part of this class in the school, but you also went and did projects outside of that. But if it were someone who was applying for general studies, I want to
Mhm.
see, oh, hey, they participate in XYZ clubs, even if they weren't the head of those clubs, it still tells a story. Each student is a tapestry, and the various threads that go through that tapestry are just as interesting as the overall tapestry. So, when it comes to those essay prompts for an application, whether it's general education or whether it's something specialized like our program, again, it's just that ability to talk about yourself because more than anything, we want to see people who have goals, people who have interests in things, as broadly and mildly as that sounds. An interesting applicant is an interesting person.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I understand that that tracks with a lot of what I've heard about, the idea of the well-rounded applicant is kind of outdated at this point, and you'd rather have someone who's very specifically motivated towards a certain direction. But I also like I want to dig in on what you said because I do find that like be an interesting applicant is sometimes like hard advice for people to
Oh,
follow
oh yeah,
because either they think like why am I interesting, right? Like I'm not, the project lead or I'm not, the track star or whatever. Or they think that, you know, they are really interesting when all they're going to be doing is kind of listing their accomplishments, right? Like it's not really a compelling story at that point. So
yeah,
what like how do you make yourself interesting to an admissions officer, right? I think that's like kind of it's a pretty broad question, but I think there's a couple
yeah.
things to kind of dig into there.
100%. And again, it's one of those frustrating points of it depends on the admissions officer, it depends on the protocols of an admissions office, it depends on the school. The application process itself can even be a real hamper to that ability to make yourself interesting because having seen a
Mhm.
bunch of different application forms, not all of them give you that opportunity to talk about yourself, your varying experiences, and how those have shaped your interest in this particular field of study. So,
Mhm.
when we're looking at applicants, you have to consider again, it's that consideration for what's happening on the other end of the table. And I think that that's tying back into our earlier conversation of having people who are consultants and people who are trying to guess what's happening in the head of the person across the table is sort of the mindset you have to
Right.
adopt. What kind of applicants is this school seeing? And in amidst that, one has to think, what are the unique experiences that I've had, regardless of how hyper specific to this field, but what makes me an interesting person, what makes me, a particular learner, even when it comes to students who are coming into the classroom, ones who love to ask questions, ones who want to engage in at length discussions, are willing to be challenged. These are all things that you can point out about yourself that make you that much more interesting to the person on the other end of the table.
Yeah, so that was something, yeah, I wanted to kind of follow up on a couple of things you said. I mean, you mentioned like what's interesting to the school. How do you as a student try to parse that out, right?
Yeah. It ultimately will require some research on the student's part, right? Um,
Mhm.
the hope for students is that they're looking at a variety of schools that uh, serve their interests, whether that be in their studies or extracurriculars, or even when it comes to, hey, I don't want to leave town. That happens
Right.
for some people. So when it comes to that application process, you find out a bit about the kind of culture of the school and the impression that the school gives out, whether that's through, their website, events. And when looking at the school, get a feel for the kind of culture that's there. So when establishing, hey, how do I make my application stand out? Yeah, it's again a point of comparison. As much as it can be damaging, it is also extremely helpful in putting in that application going, okay, I see XYZ type of student when it comes to their social media posts or when it comes to their website. Um, what distinguishes me from that student?
Yeah, I mean, that is how I would probably try to think about it if I were a student. But I also, you and I both know that like what the marketing team is doing and promoting and what's actually getting prioritized in the admissions committees are not always exactly in sync, let's say. And so I'm wondering if there's just like other ways.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, it feels crazy. I'm just going to throw out some crazy ideas and you can
sure.
tell me how crazy they are. Just like trying to email you
Hmm.
and be like, hey, what do you want? Or trying to email like professors
Yes.
for specific classes. Let's say you really want to get into 3D art and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to email the 3D art professor and say, hey, what do you guys want me to put in my
Yeah.
application so I can come study with you? Are these good ideas or are these just going to make you guys annoyed or what are your thoughts on these things?
Speaking from the experience here at AIE, our instructors love to see that. if an applicant is reaching out, wanting to ask questions of the instructor, that shows a certain level of initiative. It shows initiative, it shows a drive. I don't think that there is a universe in which that could be received poorly, uh,
Uh,
unless you're just doing it in the most crass, sideways way possible. But the issue then is not the question. But also when students call the campus asking, what are you looking for in an applicant? What are the deadlines? What are the requirements? Should I have letters of recommendation? These are all signs that point again to that initiative, that drive that makes you interesting. So,
yeah, that makes
I
sense.
guess to your earlier point, none of those are crazy.
All right, cool. Yeah, then I think the next thing is like some advice that I hear from, and sort of following up on that idea of like, you're demonstrating interest by emailing the professors and like showing that you care and showing that you want to be there and things like that. How much of that becomes like a thing that's like a tiebreaker at the end versus a thing that really that sets someone out from the beginning, right? Because I think a lot of times people do the demonstrated interest part kind of later. Like they send in their application and then they send a note that's like, I'm so excited to maybe go. And that's usually the advice that I hear. And I'm just curious, like, do you have instances of people reaching out like in May, right? Or so 2 or 3 months ahead of like the typical time when your applications would be due. And, how does that affect things? Is it something that you think is meaningful from the start?
I think that there's certainly value to be had in both. uh,
Yeah.
and at least from the admissions side of the desk, students who voice early, those are the ones that we usually keep track of. Those are the ones that,
Mhm.
you know, the name pops up, you keep seeing that name, and much in the same way that, say, like a career counselor would go, if your resume passes across somebody's desk enough times, just seeing that
Mhm.
name will associate in much the same way students that are proactive, that are in regular communication with the school, it's always seen as a positive. For the students who are vocal towards like the end of the cycle, and say hypothetically they went through the application admissions process and then were reaching out after a long period of silence, that while it is a positive and is seen as a positive, I think in most situations and circumstances, the admissions person would want to see the former rather than the latter.
For sure. I mean, I don't want to, create a situation where suddenly people are bugging you a year before they apply, but
Oh,
I
I'd be
mean,
happy
it
to hear from
also
them.
feels like, yeah, it feels like it might move that way. Things are so competitive nowadays. I mean,
Definitely.
I'm curious then, I'd love to go back to the application itself and kind of walking through just like the big pieces of it, right? And so, first, we already talked about how you want to see that they've like
Hmm.
done things related to the major and like stuff like that. But I'm curious, other than that, and other than good spelling and correct punctuation, what are you looking for on the resume specifically?
Hmm. Again, not everybody has the opportunity to do every sort of thing, so we try to be conscious of that as well. But job experience is always one of the things that we love seeing. Just having a little bit more experience under your belt, regardless of what kind of position that was and with what company, what mom and pop shop, that ability to demonstrate responsibility in a workplace is another indicator of a good student. Typically, it's folks who are able to demonstrate that discipline. And I think that that is a large part of sort of the larger screening apparatus of an application process is to suss out the teachability of a student.
Got it. Okay. And then what would you say about basically like if I asked you the same question but about the personal statement?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the personal statements is you're looking for something that's a little bit more of the sort of the story of the
Hmm.
applicant and how it's going to fit in with your school.
Yeah. Full transparency, we don't require a personal statement for the application that we have here, but we do have an admissions interview that occurs after the application. So, in
Which would be my next question. So,
which should be sort of that personal statement, but live.
Right.
So in that circumstance, it's again that person's ability to talk about themselves and their experiences. At the end of the day, when you see a single sentence for a personal statement, or even just like going back to formatting, just one massive brick of text, that does not spark joy. So,
Yeah.
when it comes to students who are trying to create an interesting experience for the admissions officer as well, that's again that consideration for the person across the desk, just seeing, oh, hey, I recognize that a person is going to be reading this. So try to inject a lot of personal voice, try to tie in elements of, oh, hey, this is what like my community was like. This is what my environment at home was like. This is what my experience in school was like. It doesn't necessarily
Mhm.
have to be I was the top of the class and the best human at everything that I ever encountered because in a lot of ways that's not as interesting as somebody who is trying to find their own pathway.
Right. Yeah, that's good to hear. And I mean, kind of teased it already, right? But I was going to ask then about the interviews. So when you're going into interviews, what are the things that you're looking to learn? Because you already have some sense
Sure.
of what the student is like. And you really, I think, it's a bit of a screening process. I think part of it is just like that it's not a bad interview.
Hmm.
At least that's my assumption. But I'm also curious, like, what are the things that you're trying to find out? Like, not like you have a checklist per se, but just
Sure.
what do you want to come away from that interview with?
Yeah. Much like the personal statement, it's an opportunity to showcase who you are, whether that's your experiences, whether that's just having good positive energy in the interview. One of the main things that we emphasize to our students is that it's an informal conversation. And we do that because if somebody, we can see their resumes, we can see their applications. So, much to your point of we already have some of this information. What we don't have is a good read on the person themselves. The questions are largely trying to suss out again that ability to talk about oneself. It's some of them are repeats even from the application. So another good thing that we like to see is if during the interview a person goes, I put on my application this, let me expand on that. So while the interview, for the most part, is not new information, isn't largely a lot of new information for the most part. We know most of that by the time that we sit down, but it's that ability to recontextualize that information.
When you say recontextualize, do you mean like bring it into their sort of their story, or do you mean more like articulate it well? I guess, yeah. How,
Hmm.
how can you expand on that word?
Yeah. When it comes to students who are coming into the interview, a large part of that standard of informality during the interview process is because naturally people don't write and speak the same. So
Mhm.
it's much more interesting to see how a person is able to tell you the same sort of information that they've already told you about their academic journey, about their extracurriculars, but shape it for the audience that is at hand. It's a little bit different if you're sending an application with a couple of essay fields out to this nameless admissions office, this nameless and faceless admissions office. But in the face of an interview, building that rapport with the person and being able to find ways to converse, to communicate, those are all interesting things that we're looking for in that interview process.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's all really good. I mean, it's basically, this is a person, like you are people, they are people, and you have to figure out if they're gonna
Yeah,
fit. And I also then wanted to, I guess, just like as the final question on interviews, just ask you like, what makes a standout, stellar interview for you?
that is a great question. There's a wide breadth of behaviors and answers that I've gotten that I've walked away from the interview going, wow, that was really successful. And I think at the end of the day, what ties all of those interviews together is that person's energy. So when it comes to however that expresses, so not everybody is as articulate when it comes to talking about their classroom experience. Not everybody has had a lot of extracurriculars, but if you are able to give the impression, even though you've only been autodidactic up until this point, you've been teaching yourself through YouTube tutorials, even that ability and that energy in talking about it, how that energizes you, how that gets you excited for the future, because that is what we're in the business of, right? Is
Right.
generating those people who have that energy and transferring it into marketable and applicable skills. So seeing
Hmm.
those people have um, be electrified to start in a program to explore things, while that is a less quantifiable value there, that is ultimately what I find ties together all of those successful interviews.
Very cool. Yeah, and I mean, I think that also like it's a universally applicable thing, but I think it's particularly applicable to the game industry because there are two types of people that I've found that worked in the game industry, which are people that were really, really excited to be there because they
Hmm.
loved the medium, and then people that it's just like they kind of got lost and somehow they were like doing HR at a video game company, right? And I
Yeah,
mean, it's the kind of place, the video game industry specifically is the kind of place where you have to really love it to stick around for a long time, I
yeah,
think. And obviously, I think that's what you guys are going for. So it makes a ton of sense.
yeah. And I just want to say
Yeah.
that it with energy, I feel like that has a false correlation to exuberance. Not everybody is going to be that big, loud personality, but there's, that saying that somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of communication is nonverbal. Just that way that that person is expressing themselves and talking about it. Not everybody has to be loud and brash in order to be a successful candidate. Um, Energy
Yeah.
expresses itself in different ways. So for the more introverted folks out there, um, you don't have to put out a false self in order to portray that energy.
Right. Yeah, listening to all of this, if I were kind of an awkward kid that was going into these interviews, I think it
Yeah.
would make me a little even more nervous, right? Because it's like I already have a hard time with this stuff, and now I'm finding out that I have to be like really excited, or else like they're not going to like me. What advice do you have for people who are nervous?
Ultimately, again, the informality is a large part of how we try to address that. It's largely a conversation. And that's how I talk about it to my students and people who are coming up to their interviews. It's not us grilling you. We're not turning the
Yeah,
screws. We don't want all of these answers to be out of a sense of, well, what is the right thing to say? Because at the end of the day, there is no right thing. There is no perfect answer to any of these questions. Um, it's what your answer is that we're interested in hearing. So, however
yeah,
that comes through, if you're a nervous person, I'm a nervous person. If I had to sit through an interview, I'd definitely be squirming a little bit. But as long as the person on the other side of the table is going, oh, well, this is them just being authentic, I think that that helps you more than you would think.
yeah. Very cool. Yeah, and then I wanted to save this one for last
Great.
because it's more specific. But I did want to ask about the portfolio because just because you mentioned it before, and I know that it can be a really big part of these like art related applications,
Yeah.
if not the biggest part potentially. So I'm curious, kind of, what are you looking for in a portfolio? I assume it can't just be, oh, they're really talented because I feel like there's got to be more to it than that,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. So I come from an arts background and I've been doing portfolio reviews associated with application processes for, oh man, thinking about the number of years is always depressing.
Yeah,
But for over 5 years, I've been like in this specific regard of looking at portfolios in tandem with applications. And to go back to an earlier point, we are looking for the teachability of that person. If you have really amazing artwork, completed artwork that is like professional portfolio quality, we would love to see it, but that doesn't tell us much about what your process is. So when it comes to the admissions interview, we really want to see you challenging yourself. So again, tying to not everybody has the opportunity to do every single class, every single extracurricular that's associated with their field of study of choice. But if in your own time you are exploring different media, you're exploring different softwares, you're even reading up on things and trying to copy it from the book itself, these are all important stepping stones on that path to learning that we want to see. So, a good portfolio, and I've advocated this for a lot of students, a good portfolio is as much finished work as it is unfinished work.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool thing to say because I think that there's the inclination with a portfolio to just put your last 12 things that were all like your best things and to not really show like the progression and stuff like that. And I mean, probably the best way to do it, if I'm guessing, is to just have a portfolio on Dribble or wherever. Maybe I feel like there's something besides Dribble for that's more video game specific. I'm blanking on the name right now. But basically, like, have your portfolio like freshman year of high school and then just like
Yeah,
continue working on it all the way through, perhaps? Is that
yeah,
like something you'd like to see?
most definitely. Actually, a lot of schools now, I've noticed, are encouraging their students to have portfolio websites. And those are kept up from anywhere from freshman year to maybe they only started putting their portfolio together their senior year. But regardless of how much lead time you necessarily have on this portfolio, showing that growth, showing that development, those are all things that we're interested in seeing.
Mhm. Very cool. Well, yeah, this has been a great episode. There's a ton of really useful info in here. I guess just anything that we didn't cover that you want to make sure we covered,
No, I mean, I'm drawing a blank.
and then any parting thoughts for the audience.
Ultimately, just be authentic. I think that that's a real struggle when it comes to hearing about these expectations for post-secondary education, is that you have to be the best version of yourself. And while that's certainly a noble goal, a noble ambition, uh, we want to know where you're at right now. We want to know what's gotten you here. So don't be afraid to just be yourself.
My, personal corollary to that is also like if you are authentically yourself and then you don't get in, then it was probably for the best,
Yeah,
right? So it kind of makes it so that you'll feel good about whatever happens.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Huck Chang from AIE. You can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses at achievable.me and be sure to use the code podcast to save 10%.